You can't just have sets and action and expect to have the movie. You need characters. You need relationships between the characters.
Frank Marshall doesn't make threats. He doesn't need to. As one of Hollywood's most powerful producers, his influence flows through every major studio, every tentpole franchise, every decision that shapes what audiences see on screen. When Marshall decides you're a problem, you don't get fired from one project. You get quietly erased from an entire ecosystem of possibilities. For over 4 decades, Marshall has been the invisible architect behind Hollywood's biggest successes: Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, Transformers, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. His fingerprints are on nearly every blockbuster that has defined modern entertainment. But Marshall operates by a simple rule that many actors learn too late: the machine is bigger than any individual part. Some performers mistake success for security. They think one hit film gives them leverage, that stardom grants them immunity from consequences. They criticize the very system that elevated them, demand creative control over franchises worth billions, or simply forget that in Hollywood's food chain, producers sit at the very top. Marshall remembers everything. Every slight, every public complaint, every moment when an actor bit the hand that fed them. He doesn't seek revenge. He simply adjusts future calculations. And when Frank Marshall removes you from his equation, you discover that entire sections of Hollywood's mathematics suddenly stop adding up to opportunity. 6. Val Kilmer. Val Kilmer arrived at the Jurassic Park 3rd casting discussions carrying a reputation that preceded him like a warning label. By 2001, stories of his on-set behavior had become Hollywood legend, demanding rewrites, clashing with directors, treating crew members like servants. Frank Marshall had heard every whisper, but talent sometimes trumps trouble. Almost.
He's been able to do all of his stunts, and there's a lot of running around and chasing and jumping and whipping and, you know.
Kilmer seemed perfect for the paleontologist role that eventually went to William H. Macy. He had the intelligence to sell scientific dialogue, the intensity to convey genuine terror, and the star power to anchor a franchise sequel. Marshall was willing to overlook the warnings until Kilmer's representatives made their intentions clear. Before any contract negotiations began, Kilmer's team delivered a list of requirements. He wanted script approval, character development input, and consultation on the dinosaur sequences. Most problematically, he wanted to understand his character's psychological journey through the prehistoric nightmare. Kilmer saw Jurassic Park 3 as an opportunity to explore themes of human survival and technological hubris. Marshall saw it as a summer popcorn movie about people running from dinosaurs. The breaking point came when Kilmer requested a meeting to discuss his vision for how the character could evolve across potential sequels. Marshall politely declined and moved on. He had learned from producing the first 2 Jurassic Park films that the dinosaurs were the stars. Human characters existed to react, run, and occasionally become lunch. Kilmer's artistic ambitions were admirable, but Marshall wasn't making art. He was manufacturing entertainment. The role went to Macy, who understood that sometimes the most effective performance is knowing when to get out of the monster's way. 5. Shia LaBeouf. Frank Marshall transformed Shia LaBeouf from a Disney Channel curiosity into a global action star. The Transformers franchise catapulted the young actor into the stratosphere of Hollywood success, generating billions in revenue and establishing him as the face of modern blockbuster entertainment. Then LaBeouf decided to critique the very machine that had elevated him. The transformation was swift and public. LaBeouf began giving interviews where he dismissed Transformers as soulless corporate product, criticized the franchise's lack of artistic merit, and suggested that working on big-budget spectacles was creatively stifling. He spoke longingly about returning to independent cinema and serious dramatic roles, treating his blockbuster success like a burden rather than a privilege. Marshall watched these interviews with growing irritation.
Friends, and they laughed and they sang together and they cried and they told stories, and it was just like a big family.
He had personally championed LaBeouf's casting over studio executives who wanted established stars. He had guided the young actor through the complex world of franchise filmmaking and helped him navigate the pressures of sudden fame. LaBeouf's public ingratitude wasn't just professional betrayal, it was personal insult. More importantly, LaBeouf discovered that Marshall's influence extended far beyond robots in disguise. Suddenly, doors that had been wide open began closing. Studios that had courted him grew distant. Projects that seemed inevitable evaporated. Marshall never spoke publicly about the split, but the message was clear throughout Hollywood. Loyalty flows both ways, and ingratitude has consequences that compound over time. 4. Katherine Heigl. Katherine Heigl mastered the art of career suicide through public commentary. Throughout the 2000s, her name appeared on casting lists for multiple Frank Marshall productions, from romantic comedies to action thrillers. She had the look, the talent, and the box office appeal that studios craved. What she also had was an inability to keep her criticisms private. Heigl's pattern was predictable and destructive. She would complete a project, promote it professionally, then months later offer brutally honest assessments in magazine interviews. She called Knocked Up a little sexist, despite its massive success. She withdrew her name from Emmy consideration for Grey's Anatomy, citing insufficient material. Each comment was technically accurate but professionally toxic. Marshall monitored these interviews with the attention of a risk assessment analyst.
He's off shooting another movie, but he looks at dailies. He said, well, if we did this, or I love that, or, so he's completely involved.
He understood that Heigl's honesty came from artistic integrity, but integrity that manifested as public criticism of collaborative work made her a liability. Producers invest millions in projects and need performers who protect those investments, not critique them in Vanity Fair. The decisive moment came when Heigl expanded her criticism beyond individual projects to romantic comedies as a genre. She suggested that the films she had starred in promoted unrealistic relationship expectations and questioned whether such entertainment served audiences well. Marshall realized that Heigl viewed her own success as morally problematic. Despite studio pressure and her proven box office appeal, Marshall quietly removed Heigl from consideration for future projects. He had learned that actors who publicly questioned the value of their own work would inevitably question everything else. In Marshall's world, doubt was more dangerous than incompetence, because doubt was contagious and could infect entire productions with second-guessing and creative paralysis. 3rd, Terrence Howard. Terrence Howard possessed the charisma and dramatic intensity that made him perfect for the Marvel Cinematic Universe's early development. As executive producer on Iron Man, Frank Marshall watched Howard bring depth and gravitas to James Rhodes, creating a performance that grounded Tony Stark's technological fantasies in military reality. Then Howard decided that his contributions deserved mathematical recognition. The conflict began with salary negotiations for Iron Man 2. Howard believed his performance had been crucial to the first film's success and demanded compensation that reflected his importance to the franchise. When Marvel offered less than he expected, Howard went public with his grievances, describing the studio's business practices as unfair and short-sighted. Marshall had seen this pattern before: actors who confused being part of a successful ensemble with being irreplaceable.
They all have to be there because again, the elements that were in the first 3 movies, he doesn't go on these adventures alone.
Howard's public complaints revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how franchises operate. Individual performances serve the larger mythology, not the other way around. No single actor, regardless of talent, was bigger than the Marvel machine. The breaking point came when Howard suggested that his character deserved expanded storylines and character development that would make Rhodes central to future films. He spoke about his vision for the character's evolution and his willingness to commit to multiple sequels if properly compensated. Marshall realized that Howard saw himself as a creative partner rather than a hired performer. Don Cheadle replaced Howard with minimal fanfare, proving Marshall's point about replaceability. Howard's public complaints had made him unemployable within the Marvel ecosystem, and Marshall's influence ensured that other major franchises learned from the example. The message was clear: talent without loyalty was just expensive risk, and risk could always be recalculated with different variables. 2. Megan Fox. Frank Marshall created Megan Fox's career and destroyed it with equal efficiency. The first Transformers film transformed an unknown actress into a global sensation, launching her onto magazine covers and establishing her as the new face of action in cinema. Fox owed everything to Marshall's faith in her potential. Then she made the mistake of criticizing the hand that fed her. Fox's downfall began with seemingly innocent comments about the filmmaking process. She described the grueling physical demands of action sequences, the challenges of acting against tennis balls representing giant robots, and her desire to take on more dramatically challenging roles. Initially, these comments seemed like standard promotional honesty, but they escalated into direct attacks on the production methods and creative choices. The nuclear moment came when Fox compared director Michael Bay to Hitler in a magazine interview, suggesting his demanding directing style was dictatorial and abusive. The comment was meant as hyperbolic criticism, but it crossed every line of professional conduct. Marshall didn't need to defend Bay publicly. The comment defended itself by revealing Fox's complete lack of industry awareness. Marshall's response was swift and absolute. Fox was fired from Transformers, Dark of the Moon, and replaced with Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, a model with no acting experience who understood her role in the franchise machinery. More devastatingly, Marshall's influence ensured that Fox's career never recovered. Studios that had courted her suddenly lost interest. Projects that seemed inevitable vanished. Fox had forgotten the fundamental rule of Hollywood success: you can criticize anything except the people who gave you everything. Marshall had demonstrated his power to create stars, and Fox's exile proved he could uncreate them just as effectively when they forgot their place in the ecosystem. 1. Edward Norton. Edward Norton's clash with Frank Marshall wasn't about ego or attitude. It was about control over the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Norton's defeat marked the moment when Marshall established that no actor, regardless of talent or reputation, could hijack a billion-dollar franchise through creative stubbornness. Norton arrived at The Incredible Hulk with impeccable credentials and dangerous ambitions. He had rewritten scripts before, shaped characters to his vision, and turned director collaboration into creative warfare. As Bruce Banner, he saw an opportunity to bring psychological complexity to what he viewed as simplistic superhero material. Marshall saw a threat to the carefully planned Marvel roadmap.
As producers, we're trying to get the most for what our budget is. And so we look at all the states that...
The conflict began in pre-production when Norton submitted extensive script revisions that fundamentally altered the character's arc. He wanted to explore Banner's scientific background, delve into the psychological trauma of his transformation, and create a more introspective take on the monster mythology. Norton envisioned a character study wrapped in superhero spectacle. Marshall needed a Hulk who could integrate seamlessly into the larger Avengers narrative without requiring extensive psychological exposition. Norton's version would have been brilliant in isolation, but incompatible with the franchise's planned trajectory. When Norton refused to compromise his vision, Marshall made the calculation that would define Marvel's future approach to difficult talent. Frank Marshall built Hollywood's biggest franchises by understanding one truth: the machine is eternal, but the parts are replaceable. In his world, loyalty isn't just expected, it's the price of admission to continued relevance.